Welcome to the Venatores Veritatis podcast with Pastor Zach Ritz and Peter Ristow. Join us for conversations in Christianity for the 21st century. Greetings, this is Peter Ristow.
And Zach Ritz.
Welcome to the Venatores Veritatis. Why do I struggle with that? What does that mean again?
Venatores, the hunters.
The hunters.
Yeah, hunters of what?
Veritatis.
Of truth.
Of truth.
Hunters of truth.
So truth is veritas.
Yes.
So veritatis.
Of truth.
Of truth. Okay. Hunters of truth. Who came up with that name?
You.
Oh, boy. Yet I struggle with it. Oh, that's so good. So, happy birthday, Zach.
Hey, happy birthday, Peter.
Yeah, so Zach's birthday was yesterday, and mine is today.
Special
so
birthday edition.
We are just rambling today. We're really not doing anything structured, don't have any particular plan. We're just going to kind of ramble our way through the podcast today. So you were just reading to me a quotation by G.K. Chesterton. Who's he?
Oh, goodness. The man, he's incredible. He's a Catholic theologian, statesman, just a great author, writer, and he's definitely one that highly influenced those such as like a C.S. Lewis or Tolkien.
Right. So he was like the generation before Lewis and Tolkien, right?
Yeah, in England. Yeah.
And he was an author and wrote a lot of mystery books that usually involved a Catholic cleric, and who was, amateur detective or something like that.
Right.
I think there's even a series on TV on BBC called Father
Brown.
Father Brown, that's really based on G.K. Chesterton's stories. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And that most of those stories took place on television, at least. They were cast in the era of like the 20s, after the Great War and before World War II. So that would be, Chesterton would have been the generation preceding Lewis and Tolkien.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's fantastic. If you like C.S. Lewis's space trilogy about Ransom, the Ransom trilogy, if you like that, if you like The Hideous Strength in particular, then you'll really like Chesterton's The Ball and the Cross.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, the whole thing is about Scottish Christian wanting to duel with an atheist Englishman, and they're wanting to have it out. Have this debate about atheism versus Christianity, and they want to fight. They want to have it out. They want to end the matter once and for all.
Now, do they physically want to fight, or
with crossed swords? They want to fight, but they can't find a place to do it. Everywhere where they try to duel, nobody wants dueling, so they keep getting in trouble with the law. They keep getting in trouble with the town. They have to now flee together, trying to find a place safe for them to be able to duel and fight one another to the death over atheism. And so it's actually, spoiler alert, it's about him and another guy, an atheist, that really like debating one another, only come to find out that it seems like nobody really cares and really wants to kind of throw them both out.
Right.
As if the conversation itself, everyone doesn't think it needs to be had, but it does. And so it's fantastic. Anyway, that was probably one of my favorite reads last year.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure. So a hidden gem.
What's the quote? You're reading from what book?
So this book is Wise Words by Peter J. Leithart. So this is kind of getting after some of our mythos and logos bringing those two things together. So what he does is within the book of Proverbs, so it's called Wise Words, Family Stories that Bring Proverbs to Life. And so what he's doing is he's giving all these mythological stories in order to highlight some sort of truth within the Proverbs. Yes. Which Chesterton is all about that. Obviously C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, they're all about that. They love these two worlds colliding together.
Right.
And so G.K. Chesterton, Peter Leithart has a quote of him in here that says, "Stand up and keep your childishness." Lewis was another one like that, really wanting to fight for that within us, like the of mysticism and just being in awe of things. Stand up, he says, and keep your childishness. Read all the pedants, screeds, and strictures. Now,
yeah, there's people out there that are probably smarter than us. Right?
Yeah, far smarter. Yeah, so some of you are not missing a beat. We had to look it all up.
Right.
Yeah. So what did we say? The pedants were
a teacher who's trying to impress with the use of his vocabulary.
Yeah.
Sort of like...
Kind of like how
Chesterton's doing right there. Yeah.
In the very sentence, he's showing off his use of vocabulary. Yeah. So read all those who are trying to show off their vocabulary and all their writings. Read all of them. Read all the screeds, which a screed is what?
It was a long, monotonous reading. Yeah.
Just a long, monotonous, just seems like maybe it's not going anywhere, but just, stick with it, read through it. Man, we've tried to read a lot of classical literature, and there's some that just seem like they go on forever.
Right.
And it's not really quite yet, at least to our modern senses, we're not really picking up on maybe what they're trying to teach or trying to say. So sometimes reading, it's like a workout. To try to really keep listening and staying engaged.
Right.
So read those really long screeds and strictures.
Strictures,
which are
rules. Rules, formal. Basically, you can say rules, but formal approaches and rules.
Which I guess that would be like extreme logic. It wouldn't be. It'd be very screeds and strictures are probably opposites. Maybe.
Probably.
This long monotonous story versus a stricture. Very laid out, ruled.
Right.
Okay, so he says, stand up, keep your childishness, read all the pedants, screeds, and strictures, but don't believe in anything that can't be told in colored pictures.
I like this guy.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot. Yeah, that's so fun.
Yeah.
Here he is like showing off, and then, just being silly, and allow you to keep your childishness.
Yeah.
With a nice little chuckle. Which I love that. Those that really are at the very top of their game intellectually are able to be intellectuals and have fun with it.
Right.
Have fun with language, right? And so there's something that's often lost with, intellectuals being too high above reading these childish stories of Lewis or Tolkien or this make-believe fiction stuff.
No, who he would remind me of is, oh gosh, I've just lost his name. One of the problems with being my age, you lose things instantaneously. John, the mathematician from Oxford.
John Lennox.
John Lennox.
Absolutely, yes. Brilliant and
man.
Jolly.
Yes, absolutely. Has fun with his brilliance. Probably one of our foremost apologists in this day, in the ilk of C.S. Lewis. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. He was debating an atheist one time, and you're right. Yeah, so very similar. He says, well, your atheism is a belief. You've gone on and talking about how my faith is nothing simply but a belief. A system of thoughts and ideas that I ascribe to. And he says, well, your atheism is also a belief. It's a faith. And he says, no, it's not. He says, well, sure it is. Don't you believe it? So he says, no. Well, then he doesn't believe in atheism. If he says yes, well, then it's a belief. It's a faith.
Was that the same conversation where he asked if the atheist asked John Lennox whether he was raised in the faith?
Yeah.
And John replied, yes, he was raised in the faith and,
Christian parents.
Christian parents. And then John Lennox posed the same question right back at the guy.
Because he said, well, see, you just believe all that because your parents did.
Yeah, that's right. The atheist said that. You just believe that because your parents did.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And he says, well, what about you? Were you not brought up in the faith of your parents? Were your parents atheists? Yes. So then it's like, okay, then. So what we're about then is to talk about which one is actually true. And so anyway, it's incredible. And he's so jolly, yeah. And so I just love that with Chesterton. And I think that there's something to that quote. Can you write in such a way that is a story, and it's masterful, it's beautiful, and I think he does it here. He's got quite a few of them, but there was one in particular that I wanted to read for us.
Oh, let's read it. Yeah.
You could enjoy your pipe and whiskey and be a little birthday read for us. Okay. I think you'll like it. If not, they can just skip around to something else that more suits them. But it's called The Bleeding Tree.
The Bleeding Tree. Okay.
Okay. So once upon a time, an oak tree stood on a hill overlooking a quiet valley. The tree was tall for his age and very strong. His long branches spread in every direction. His leaves sparkled like emeralds in the sunlight. Where his branches met his thick trunk, robins and gray squirrels built their nests. On the other side of the valley was a temple of unearthly beauty. It was so wondrous a temple that the tree often doubted that men could have built it. It must have fallen from the sky. Every morning and evening a song drifted from the temple, a song so pure it filled the heart with a painful joy. The tree gazed each day at the temple of unearthly beauty and listened to the song that filled the heart with a painful joy. He was saddened when night fell, hidden the temple in darkness, and he was delighted when the morning sunlight unveiled the temple anew. He felt lonely in the evening when the song faded to silence, and he thrilled when it began each day at daybreak and sunset. He dreamed of a world where there would be no night and where the song would never end. He wanted to gaze and listen forever. But the more the tree looked at the temple, the more he listened to the song, the more he knew he would never be content with looking and listening. Even if he could look and listen for all eternity, deep in his heart, he did not want to gaze at the temple. He wanted to become the temple, to surround the hushed space of the inner sanctuary where even children spoke in whispers. Deep in his heart, he did not want to listen to the song. He wanted to become the song, to spread himself over the valley like a blanket of music, softer than silence. Thinking these thoughts made the tree sadder still, for he was a tree and he knew he would never be a temple of unearthly beauty or a song that filled the heart with a painful joy. His branches were too twisted, his bark too rough, the voice of the wind through his leaves too harsh and hollow. So for many years the tree stood on his hill, gazing and listening. His heart grew sadder with each passing year. In what seemed like a very short time, he was no longer a young tree. And still he wished nothing more than to become the temple of unearthly beauty and to be the song that filled the heart with a painful joy. One night the temple hill was lighted as if it were day. An orange glow flickered against the black sky, growing brighter then nearly disappearing. Through the cool night air, the tree heard a distant voice cry, "Fire!" When the sun rose the next morning, the valley was utterly still. The mockingbirds refused to sing. No squirrels scampered chattering through the treetops. Worst of all, where the temple had been, there was only a smoking black ruin. Men circled the ruins with their hands thrust deep in their pockets, their heads bowed. Women sat on the grass with their faces in their hands. The tree was sickened to see what had happened to the temple. Knowing he could no longer gaze at the temple or listen to its song, he felt more empty and alone than ever. For several days, the men circled the ruins and the women sat on the grass. Then one day, the men stopped circling, to huddle together, and the women drew their faces from their hands and looked up. The men talked and nodded and pointed excitedly. Smiles crossed the women's faces. Across the valley, the tree watched with growing wonderment. The next day, he watched the men and women work in the midst of the black ruins, knocking over the remaining walls and picking up charred pieces of the temple's furniture. In a few days, the ruin was gone. All that remained of the temple was a black stain on the green hillside. Then the men slung belts filled with shining tools across their shoulders and started down the hill toward the forest where the tree stood watching. They disappeared into the valley and then reappeared near the tree. Soon they were circling the trees with their hands in their pockets. The tree was startled by a shout that came from somewhere near his trunk. "This one looks ready," a man cried to his friends. In a moment, the tree was surrounded and the men were running their hands up and down his bark. It tickled, but the tree was afraid to laugh. The men talked and nodded. Then all but one ran back into the forest. The remaining man took a stick with a bright metal head from his belt, stamped his feet, twisted his back away from the tree, and swung the stick. The blow shook the tree from his topmost branches down to his roots. In shock and surprise, he cried out, but no one seemed to hear. He felt a stinging pain low on his trunk as the shining tool made another gaping wound, and then another. Strips of bark peeled away like the skin of an apple. The tree felt sap flowing from his wound. "Look at this," the man cried. "This sap looks red, like blood. I've never seen anything like this before. It's a bleeding tree." The other men came closer and circled the tree with their hands in their pockets, nodded, then scampered back to their hiding places in the forest. The man swung his shining tool again and again. After a while, he became tired, and another man took the stick and began swinging it on the other side of the trunk. The tree shuddered in agony with each blow. He felt himself weakening as his trunk was slowly cut off from its roots. All the men took turns striking the tree with the shining tool. Finally, the tree could no longer stand and began to sway. The men cried out and ran deeper into the forest as the tree, losing all strength, fell to the ground with a thunderous crash. No use trying to get up, the tree thought. Perhaps if I lie here, they will leave me alone and go away. Before he had finished that thought, the men had come out of the forest, each carrying a shining tool of his own. They pushed their way through the branches toward the trunk and swung their tools against the branches. One by one, branches were torn from the trunk. At each branch, red sap dripped onto the ground. The man who had first swung his shining tool against the tree cut off a thick branch. "This is good, strong wood," he shouted to his friends. "We could probably use this branch in the organ." To the tree, it sounded as if the man was shouting from the far end of the long tunnel. From the tree's higher branches, a voice answered, "These smaller branches are good, strong too. We can make pipes and flutes and violins from these." In no time, the tree's branches had all been removed. The tree no longer felt pain, only a numbness like death. Perhaps they wanted only the branches, he thought. Now they will leave me alone and let me die in peace. No sooner had he finished that thought than he felt strong hands tying rope to his trunk. It seemed to be happening to someone else, the tree thought. His mind drifted into a kind of sleep. He was jerked awake as the men bowed their backs to pull his branchless trunk down into the valley. They pulled again and again. Finally, the tree felt himself rolling down the hill faster and faster. Then the men scattered in all directions, picked up their tools, and came running to catch up. At the bottom of the hill, the tree came to a rest. Still dizzy from the rolling, he heard the pounding of feet as the men bounded down the hill after him. Then they took hold of the ropes and pulled him toward a long house without walls that stood beside the river that flowed through the valley. Grunting and groaning, the men pulled what was left of the tree into the long house, lifted him over a deep pit. Looking up, the tree saw two men holding a long metal strip covered with sharp teeth. He was too weak to move and could only watch in terror as the men pulled the toothed metal back and forth across his trunk. It cut into his trunk as the teeth of a wolf tear a helpless sheep. Dust flew in all directions. The tree tried to cry out, to stand up, to roll off the table, but it was no use. Crying out with a loud voice, he fainted or perhaps died. The tree knew nothing of what happened next. After his trunk was sawn into boards, the boards were cut and trimmed, corners were squared, and the boards were sanded smooth. Then they were polished to a golden shine. Small branches were cut, hollowed out, and carved into pipes and flutes. Larger branches were cut, bent, carved, and polished to make other instruments. The largest branches were cut into boards for an organ. The tree never knew how long he had slept for, or fainted, or died, or whatever it was that had happened to him. When he first awoke, he did not know where he was. After the pain he had endured, he was amazed to find himself alive. Slanting rays of morning sunlight, changed into a rainbow by stained glass windows, filled the air. Everywhere he looked, his eyes were dazzled by the sights. In front of him, the tree saw a wooden pillar carved with great cunning, and the tree recognized it as one of his friends from the forest. Far below him, men and women and children sat in restless silence, waiting for something or someone. Then there was music, played softly at first, then louder and louder. The tree recognized the flutes, violins, and organ as his own branches. The people began to sing, and then the tree knew. He had been made into the inner wall of a new temple of unearthly beauty, and that his branches had become a song so pure it filled the heart with a painful joy. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. Proverbs 3, 11 through 12.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Wow.
Yeah, it really strikes a chord, doesn't it?
Oh, my. Yes. Yes. Brings a tear to your eye.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's where you start thinking, you're like, yeah, there is so much that is better told in a story form like that. And even though his moral of his story is also beautiful, thinking about the pain that the tree endures in order to become this,
right,
the very thing he always longed for and wanted.
Right.
Yeah.
Unaware what it would take to get there.
Right. Right. Yeah. But then he's filled with a painful joy. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Right.
To think about our lives and being a part of that temple that God calls us.
Right.
We are like living stones,
right,
made into the temple of the Lord, filled with the Holy Spirit and singing unto him. So.
Wow, there's so much there.
There's so much there, yeah.
Mythos and logos.
Yeah.
Mythos and logos.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so much that to be able to pull from that. Even thinking about the bleeding tree, I was thinking, is this like Jesus?
Yeah.
Right? Who dies upon the cross, the men surrounding him, tearing him apart. Kind of like a Psalm 22. The dogs that encompass me, they tear me limb from limb sort of idea. He says none of my bones are broken. But anyway, again, just all these different allusions.
Right.
Jesus who dies, resurrects, it brings about the,
right,
the new temple, the old temple destroyed, right? 70 AD.
Right.
The new temple in Christ, the church, Christ the head, church the body.
Wow.
Singing praises for him for all eternity, but not without going through the pain.
Right. Right.
All the trials and tribulations and struggles.
Right.
To be able to be filled with in our hearts that painful joy.
Right.
Yeah. That's one you just need to sit on for a while.
Yep.
There are a lot more like it, though. Great writer.
And what's the name of the book again?
Wise Words. Peter J. Leithart. Family stories that bring the Proverbs to life. Yeah. It's a little treasure. Probably get it for like $10 on Amazon if they're even still in print. I don't know.
Do you use it for like family worship?
Yeah, we recently read one. Yep, for family worship. I try to find things that are interesting for the kids. It's kind of like the G.K. Chesterton. We read all of our pedants and screeds and scriptures. Yeah. Read everything you can get your hands on, you know? Mm-hmm. Especially when it's, especially the classics and then even these sorts of writings, you know, those that can model after so many others, and be able to write like that. It's even good to hear good writing like that. Like I want the kids to learn how to think in those terms,
right.
You know, of imagery, you know, the beauty of storytelling, which is sadly like with just the entertainment. Like if you call something like for kids, you know, it's usually just stupid, you know, and like how like the Minions, you know, I know the kids love Minions, and I'm like, all right, I get it, you know, these little yellow guys running around, you know, talking some sort of gibberish of Spanish or something, I don't know, and you know, farting around and goofing off. It's like, okay, you know, it's mostly just like dumb entertainment to make you laugh, and that's kind of all it is. And anything that has a story is usually like a liberal, you know, woke, anti-story, if anything. So,
right. You know, even, I mean, you mentioned the classics, but even going, you know, the early 20th century, you know, Melville and Dostoevsky with War and Peace. I mean, you read Melville, Moby Dick as an example.
Oh yeah.
You know, his sentences are what would be 3 or 4 paragraphs nowadays. I mean, it's just long run-on sentences, and you have to read through it to get your mind thinking that way, rather than these short, you know, 10-word sentences. You've got to continue reading through that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that would be a screed.
That would be a screed, yeah.
But you're right. And it's really good, I think, for our brains, but not only just for our brains, but it brings it all together. You know, you're starting to bring together both like your very, you know, logical reasoning mind with just the beauty of imagery and storytelling. And I mean, when those two things come together, I was talking with another friend, a mutual friend, and he says the same thing. He says there's a part of humanity that is lost if we don't do that. Mm-hmm. Like it's something about who the human being is.
Right. You
know, if we just only overemphasize the short, you know, maybe just the strictures, you know, the rules, it's just not. And even though the pedant, you know, is kind of like a puffed up person who uses a lot of big words and such, but it doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be. You know, what's interesting is that the way that you learn vocabulary is by reading that stuff and doing what we did and look the things up.
Yeah, right.
You know, hardly anyone does that anymore. They'll skip the words because the context can sort of explain it.
Yeah.
But if you look the word up, it adds a richness to the context that you wouldn't otherwise know.
That's a great point. So for my birthday last night, we went out to O'Brien's Irish Pub, and it's so funny because all the things I love, you know, listening to, reading, watching, it's kind of like going to one of those pubs like in Lord of the Rings or something. So the kids loved it. It looked like dad. It was definitely like a dad place to be.
Right.
You know, but it's a nice, you know, a really nice place. Stone, you know, walls and just everything's old and everything's, you know, European looking. I just love it. Yeah, so, you know, they got to see a real beautiful pour of a Guinness, you know, in the Guinness glass, you know, and just like, I was like, guys, look, this is a thing of beauty, you know? We had the Guinness sticky wings, and they were amazing. So some sort of Guinness sauce, like with the wings, is so incredible. We had, which you don't normally have, Scotch eggs, you know, and so, you know, you've made your own Scotch eggs.
Yeah,
right?
I make Scotch eggs.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's just, they liked them, but not as much as the wings, and the sausage rolls was another one. It was like a sausage inside of a real flaky, kind of like a croissant.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Probably not croissant, that's French, but something like that. With the sauce was kind of the main thing. Garlic, something or the other. And yeah, Sailor loved that. But anyway, I say that because Judah, after we put in our order, we got our drinks, and then, he's seen other people get their food, and he's like, why is our food not out yet? It's taking forever. Because he's most accustomed that if we eat out, it's maybe fast food for him. You don't always take the children out to, nicer restaurant, and just driving the price way up. So, and they usually don't appreciate all the nice things. But yeah, so we're there, and he's just thinking, why is this food taking so long? And Carrie said, because what you're accustomed to is fast food. But if you get fast food, you get fast food quality.
Right.
Everything they're making, right, they're making here. And, if it was me at home, it would take me way longer, than just 20 minutes to get all of the things that we just ordered, ready and prepared.
Right.
So if they're making them fresh back there, which I think they are, and we're going to be able to tell the difference. And of course you can.
Yeah.
So there's something which that fast food, or that really short, 10, what would be 10 sentences for that one rich sentence,
right?
Of Moby Dick or anything else. We actually have been trained to desire the fast food. Right. Actually, I feel that too as a preacher.
Right.
They want, hey, listen, just get to the application. Just give me something. How's this going to change my life tomorrow morning? Right. Give me something I can apply right now. I want it now. I don't want to do any work. Just bring it down. Spoon feed me. My attention span, modern man's attention span, isn't long enough to be, listening to you read some book on the bleeding tree or whatever else. Just get to the moral of it. Moral of the story. Hurry it up.
I'm so glad you don't do that.
Well, it's a fight. It's a battle.
I'm sure it is.
Within my own self, because I want people to get something from it. I want them to remain engaged. I want them, to listen. But I also want to train them to learn how to maybe even listen painfully, to listen in a way that's like, okay, I really got to pay attention. Let me, wake myself up here, okay, focus in.
It's interesting. Lois said on the way home yesterday, said, that was a really good sermon, which was really interesting for her to say that, because you did an introduction on 1 Corinthians, and you really spent, the 25, 30, 35 minutes on 3 verses.
Yeah.
And it was really an introduction. It was laying the groundwork for the context.
Yeah. How do we orient ourselves to be thinking about this book?
Yeah. And I thought, wow, what a great comment. It's a great sermon when it's just the introduction. We're really not even into the meat of the word.
Right. Yeah.
But you pulled it off with those first 3-4 verses. You went back to the Old Testament.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The Daniel 7 understanding of the saints. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that even just with that introduction, and one of the other, comments I had after service was someone came forward, they were new, they're just checking us out. And they said, I really love just how conversational it was. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, man, I know I got to try not to lose that as now I get into Paul's thinking. Because now, once I'm getting into Paul's thinking and thought, I manuscript a lot more, and I'm more focused on the manuscript in trying to get and understand his flow of thought. Because he is
he's that same kind of guy.
Yeah. And we were talking about this at men's meet and greet. Like he goes and gets every rabbit. Like someone's like, oh, I'm kind of went down a rabbit hole in this. Let's get back to our original, idea of what we're doing here. When he gets an idea, he will go off, and he will go all the way. He'll get that rabbit, and he'll have himself some rabbit stew. Like Elmer Fudd. He is after that wascally rabbit, and he's going to get him. Mm-hmm. And then he's going to come back, and then so you realize, oh man, we're in chapter 3, but we covered all this stuff. but now we're back to the original idea.
Right.
3 chapters later.
Right.
And so I know Trump says that he does this really well, whether he does or not. He says he does everything really well. But, he talks about the weave. He's like, I'm weaving. So I might be, it sounds like I'm way over here, but I'm going to bring it back.
Right.
I'm going to weave it back in. I'm going to show you,
I love speakers like that. I love guys when they can do that and carry that thread and when he brings it back, it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like even the bleeding tree. I love how at the very end he comes back to, and you want him to say it. You're like, you kind of start already picking up on it when they're like, oh, we can use these for flutes and organs, and you're like, oh yeah, that was his original desire.
Right.
And then he's getting taken down, my guess is to like a sawmill, by the water.
Right.
And maybe it's like a hydro powered mill.
It sounds to me like it was a pit saw, which is one guy below and one guy above with the big.
Oh, that's right. You're right. In a long house. Yeah. And they were just sawing. Well, they were sawing, but then they were made into planks, into boards, and then it says they were smoothed out and put a golden shine, which then made me think, oh, maybe that's like the floor. He became the inner walls, and the inner floor of the entire temple. After he was sanded down and smoothed and everything else, for that, because he said he was too rough and he was too, they're talking about the discipline of the Lord and the reproof, to sand us down and make us into something beautiful. But yeah, you want him to come back to that original desire. What about that, the song, that it comes through all of his branches, which once they were too hollow and, they didn't sound harsh. It didn't sound good when the wind would blow through. But now he's an organ and the wind is coming through. Right. But it's a beautiful song.
Wow.
So it's like everything has its, pair and its connection all the way through. And it's amazing how much our minds, like we really desire that.
Right.
Like we want the introduction to have, they call it a rap, but for the conclusion to match the introduction and kind of match everything nicely together.
Right. That's the old, tell them what you're going to tell them.
Yeah.
Tell them what you told them.
Right.
Yeah. The three steps in putting together any kind of speech or sermon or whatever.
Yeah. And when you can do that in the, deductive or inductive way, forget inductive, deductive, but the other way is start talking, and make it seem like, okay, are we ever going to get to the point here? And what is your point?
Right.
And then when you get to it, it's like, oh, I should have been paying more attention because now it all makes sense at the end.
Right.
It's kind of like a movie that you have to go back and watch over.
Right.
Because, it didn't just tell you right off the bat, what to expect. And you didn't know where you were halfway through and you didn't know where it was going. Those are even more enjoyable.
Yeah.
If you don't know.
Right.
Find yourself lost, and then before you know it.
I'm almost twice as old as you are.
True.
Not quite, but almost twice as old as you are. And I'm so glad I grew up when I did, honestly. It was a different time, a different culture. I mean, I heard someone recently saying, said they were using the illustration of, phones, cell phones. And said, my parents, they had a completely different experience with phones than I do. And for me, a phone is a very seldomly used app on my phone. And that's true. Everyone texts and all of that sort of thing. Wow. Whereas, we conversed, we'd spend hours on the phone with someone, I remember when I was in high school and had a beau, I would, my folks would get so upset because I'd be on the phone for an hour, and
right.
You just, you don't
get off that phone. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't see that anymore. It's these,
right.
180 character texts, Do
you remember? So thankfully, even though I'm half your age, my poverty level allowed me to appreciate, older technology, such as the wind-up phone.
The dial phones.
Dial phones?
Yeah,
Is that what you call it?
Before
the one
push
that
buttons.
you had to...
Yeah.
And, yeah. And
it was all mechanical.
It had a little metal piece.
Yeah, it was all mechanical. Yeah. What was going on over at the switch, at the switching station, it was actually sending electrical pulses, and it was tripping mechanical relays is what was actually happening. So when you dial, you dial number 9 and you hear tick, 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 tick.
Right.
That was it sending an electrical pulse down to the switch station, the phone switch station.
Really?
And it was
like a Morse code sort of thing?
Yeah, it was causing relays.
Oh, relays.
To trip. Oh. And then, all those numbers finally would get to the party that you wanted through that.
That's incredible.
I actually have one of those. I don't know if I can find it right now, but I actually have one of those relays that came out of a phone closet from years and years and years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had those growing up before we had like the even the dial up,
push button. Yeah, then it went all electronic tones.
Yeah, and then it was a long. Oh, really? By tones. Tones is what was.
It was tone.
And then right, and then you got like the extension cords, for the kitchen. Mm-hmm. Kitchen phone had the really long cord, and then they came out with the cordless. But back then, if I was on the phone, you talk about talking forever. You're talking to like a girlfriend or something like that when you're little, and you're on the phone, mostly not talking, but
right, yeah, just breathing into the phone,
yeah, just like okay, don't know what to say. But then my mom would pick up or dad would pick up, and they start. Right. You'd have to wait.
You'd have to hear, yeah.
For all 7 digits, but yeah.
And then say, Mom, get off the phone.
And then they'd be waiting, and they're like, hello? And you're like, it's me, Mom, I'm on the phone. Well, get off, I need to make a phone call. Okay, all right, I'll get off. All right, bye,
Right.
Then you hang up, and then you would, Or you try to sneak, if your sister was on the phone, you could hold it down and then slightly lift up on it really slow, and they'd be like, wait, did you hear that? If you heard like kind of the click of someone else coming online.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I think someone's on the phone.
Hey, Paula, if you're watching this, do you remember when we had those old rotary phones, the dial phones, that if you were really cool, you could just hit the plunger button that would hang up the phone. You could just hit it right number of times, and it would dial the number. So, you
really?
Pushing the thing that would hang up the phone. Yeah, if you just did it fast, you could dial it. So yeah, that was the cool thing as a kid. If you learn how to do that and not use the dial at all, but just.
I remember there was some number you could call to see what time it was in different places. I don't know, something weird like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, now you just take out this thing.
Yeah, you just look. Yeah, right. You can look anywhere.
No one even uses watches anymore.
I know.
It's so strange. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but growing up, I'm glad to hear you say that because a lot of people, I think it was like, I don't know, it's probably been this very woke liberal, which is basically this neo-Marxist push that's saying anything traditional is, wrong, out of date, not cool, bigoted, come on, get with the times sort of thing. One of the strategies with that of always talking about the future is unknown, right? So if we can keep pressing to the future and change, then whoever's in charge of, kind of leading that, they get to be the ones that determine, and we are always dependent on them to lead us into the future, which is an unknown thing. Whereas the past, that's where we're at, that's where we're living. That's, the present, is what's going on now. If you keep pushing me to the future and talking about the past as, something that we should look down upon, and even the current, hey, we need to keep pressing forward, well, then we're always dependent on that person, whoever they are, trying to take us into the future,
right,
of whatever future that they want.
Right.
So it's just a nasty trick. But growing up, that was kind of the thing. Oh, you're not cool, or your generation, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to use a cell phone, and you don't know how to use technology. You don't know how to use a computer, which is funny because you're the one that does all the podcast editing.
Yeah, I know.
You know all this stuff. I don't, so you're twice my age, but you're way better at it. But I love to hear you say that you loved your upbringing.
Yeah.
Rather than for other people to, kind of be like, oh, well, I'm just the old geezer, and, that we're all supposed to somehow look down on the past.
Yeah.
I think we need to reject that, and I really like C.S. Lewis. He talks about chronological snobbery that he noticed in his day of people just assuming that just because we are, modern day, that somehow we're more intelligent than people of past.
Right.
It's like, no, we don't even know what pedance means. So
yeah.
they are a lot smarter than we are. We have to Google it.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's something that's really good. Talking about, what are those traditional things now that we've kind of had to live through this, from the 60s maybe all the way to now today, this past like 40, maybe 60 years of this, of people just kind of going against traditional,
just for the sake of going against
the sake of going against it. Yeah. I don't think they really had an idea of like what is the future? How is it better than where we've been? It was just, hey, down with all things,
right?
Down with all tradition, down with all patriarchy, down with all,
right?
Family or, traditional men or women's roles, or down with any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
It was just a ongoing attempt to destroy it all.
Right.
Only to come to find out, it's like, no, that we needed all of that.
Right.
Let's regain it.
Yeah, I went through my adolescence in the late 50s and early 60s. And things started to change then. My parents' generation was the children should be seen but not heard generation. Mm-hmm. And that was my parents' generation. And then my generation was a little bit more empowering of the kids, but still parents had a really significant role in direction and discipline and upbringing. And it seems to me, from my perspective, that we've almost done a reversal in this latter generation.
The parents should be
seen but not heard.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Really, truly.
I know. You're right. Even with all the things going on in the schools, they've been saying things like, we'll keep, your son or your daughter's transitioning. We're going to keep it away from the parents. It's just going to be with the counselor, school counselor. We're not going to tell them anything about that. And, we know it's best for your children, and you just need to be there and supportive and quiet and not really speaking into it or giving direction or discipline, of your child. And so I think that's been, you kind of get to the full end of that, and people realizing like, no, wait, these are my children. You don't own them. You're not their parents. I'm their parents.
I'm so glad that there's a Christian generation of people like yourself and others that we know that are taking it back, and rejecting that notion that the school system or the courts or whoever knows something better about raising your kids than you do. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been horrible, parents, and
sure.
And but that's been true forever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. I think even with like prohibition and everything else, you have someone who's abusing alcohol and beating their wife. Okay, we'll deal with that man.
Yeah.
Deal with the man. Let's not put up with that. Same sort of thing if it's neglectful or abusive parents. Don't put up with it. Mm-hmm. Right? We just need to have a right definition of what that is.
Right.
If you say that I'm a neglectful and abusive parent because I'm homeschooling my children and teaching them about Jesus.
Right.
Okay, well then now, now we've got a problem.
Yeah, that goes back to who's our authority.
Yeah, Daniel 7.
Right.
For anyone who hadn't watched that, you might want to go watch that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from where? Who's going to be the ultimate standard of telling us what is right and wrong, good from evil?
Right.
It's especially important when it comes to law. And so, yeah, exactly. But even with that, thinking about culture, I think that's important. so growing all those understandings of family and then even when we're talking about with the reading and everything else, like we're building a culture that can actually push back against, the culture that is trying to be, it's basically just an anti-culture.
Right.
A culture that wants to be anti all things that the Bible says. We're building a culture where everything is, in its place, rightly ordered.
Right.
Everything has a place and it's in its place, sort of understanding.
Yeah. When I read the Critical Race Manifesto,
yeah.
It is entirely about taking out of the hands of parents,
right,
the raising of children.
Yeah. What they mean by it takes a village.
Yes. This means,
much different than what we might say.
Right.
Right. If we would say, it takes a village to raise, your kids.
The community of our church. It takes,
communal influences, and you want, them to have friends and like-minded, families coming together and learning from one another, and within this great culture of pursuing Christ, and at the center, we're like family together, and we're very helpful. However, even for us, we need to always know where those bounds are. I'm not your child's parent.
Right.
Whereas, to your point, that manifesto of critical race theory is trying to say, no, children are, they're just as much our children as they are yours.
Right. And
they're our future. They're our children are our future. They're our, responsibility equally all together. No, that's not true.
Right.
Even as they try to make you feel compassionate towards other children, maybe that are more underprivileged or what have you. It's like, okay, we can be compassionate, towards others, and in that way, that brotherly love is good.
Yeah.
But if it's, it can't cross those boundaries.
Right. The best thing would be where a community would be able to encourage and help those that are younger brothers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That may be having trouble getting their feet under them as far as raising children and all that sort of thing. So
the goal is to get the feet under them.
The goal is to get their feet under them, not to take them away from them.
Correct.
The goal is to make them the ones that are responsible. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't treat adults like children.
Right.
But call them to adulthood and call them to, and help them, get their feet under them, help them be that, be what God has called for them to be.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which is great. I think that's part of, what's going on in our world right now, of what people are after, like, what was I created for? What's my purpose? What does it mean for me to be, husband and father? What does that mean for me? Even the idea, what I was saying about human, what does it mean to be human?
Right.
And what is so glorious about that? Because you see, like, even in like California and others, where it's just like, when you have a worldview that is so anti-human, and you don't take the necessary precautions to ensure that human beings are well cared for and protected, and even more than your natural forests or your natural habitat of some fish or turtles or whatever else it may be.
Right.
When you put those two things equal, or if actually some worldviews talk about humanity as a cancer, to create to all of the world. So we're cancerous. We need to just completely, be hands off and, not clean up the fallen trees and forests and not disturb this natural habitat of this such and such a thing. And right.
And we see the result of that right now in LA, right?
Right. Yeah. And so if you have that worldview and you're consistent with it, you view human beings as a cancer to all natural, world, then, okay, well,
then you would be saying the fires in LA is a good thing.
Right. Or just a natural thing, you know, just kind of what naturally happened. So, yeah, what can you say? Whereas they know mankind is made to be stewards of all creation. We are the ones who are called to have to cultivate, you know, the gardens, and it is our responsibility to go forth and help all these things thrive, and also, you know, ultimately protect.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Protect people, provide for them, care for them.
Right.
I think that's got to be your main goal. Like, you know, the fact that it's not is, I don't know. I think, you know, we see everybody rushing in now, but even you think about that, everything's, and when I was reading that, the bleeding tree with the, you know, the fire that happened with the temple.
Right.
And then it was burnt all the way down, and they cleaned up the rubble, and there was nothing but a black stain on a green hillside. Okay, how are you going to rebuild now? So also with Sunday, we're talking about your foundation has to be Christ and his word.
Yeah.
You know, right? Even if you don't know who Christ is or what his word says.
Right. Exactly.
All of it's still true.
Right.
So you might even have people that are living their lives principally, you know, based on Christ and his teachings, though they don't know Christ or his word. They find themselves, you know, gravitating toward, you know, those morals, virtues, and what have you. But nonetheless, if you peel back, you know, you kind of see behind the curtain, it's Christ and his word, right? In him, all things hold together. It just, and I think what we see is
all things hold together.
Yeah. Anything else right now, anything else, it just all falls apart. Be burnt to the ground, you know. That's the end of it, destruction. So, and even though I saw that, there's like some people that are dressing up as firefighters and looting and running into places and looting.
Gosh. Yeah, I haven't seen that.
It's so bad. Just the depravity of man, you know.
Yeah.
Highlighted.
And any excuse to make themselves a god, do what they want to do.
Sure. Yeah, if they believe that there is no God, and
who is God? Me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Me. Right. Catch me if you can.
Right.
I'm gonna just live it up. Yeah.
So let's get theological here for a minute. Not that we haven't been, but you were reading that and you were talking, and you know that there's a couple of things that came to mind. I was thinking of when the men tore down the walls and then went about rebuilding the temple, the unearthly beautiful. That's how we put it?
Of unearthly beauty, yeah.
Yeah, unearthly beauty.
Some heavenly.
Yeah, I was thinking of Zerubbabel and rebuilding the walls. Yeah. And you've talked about the sword and the trowel, you know, rebuilding the walls with both the trowel to construct and a sword to defend.
Yeah.
That's where we as believers need to be, and it's going to get us in trouble.
Yeah.
We're going to be fighting off the those that would want to see that destroyed, because it's a threat. It's a threat. That was the threat, you know.
It's true.
These people are building these walls, and you know, they're rebuilding Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple, and they're going to become a strong nation.
Yeah, it's interesting because they were given permission to go rebuild it.
Yeah. And given materials.
And they prioritized the wall first before the temple was rebuilt.
Right.
And so as the walls start going up, people start noticing. Okay, that wall is a distinction.
Right.
Right?
Right.
As soon as that distinction, you know, comes up, now there's issue. So I think in that sense, walls are necessary. we often talk about, hey, you need to bring down your walls, or, you need to, whether that's relationally, or, don't put up a wall for people, or don't be too judgmental. Maybe, maybe they're trying to, think through in what way walls are bad. Good walls also protect and they define, whether it's doctrine, theology, orthodoxy versus heresy, there has to be a wall. There has to be boundaries. I think we even learned that the open borders idea, can lead to such destruction and harm for people. So you have to have a wall, you have to have a boundary, and you have to, make sure that you think through, even with the relationships, right. You can't just always be an open book all the time to everyone. Not everybody is friendly, not everybody is. Some people are seeking to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
So even have healthy boundaries, healthy walls.
Well, let me ask you your opinion on that then, about boundaries and walls. And back in the 70s, Lois and I and our looked in. There was a book that came out in the early 70s called "Living Together in a World Falling Apart," and I forget the author's name, but the idea was, that it made sense to share lives, share everything. People were we actually spent a lot of time trying to find. There was another couple that we were really close with, and we spent a lot of time trying to find a place where the two families could live together in a single house. It never worked out. There was, at the time, there were governmental restrictions as to how many unrelated adults could live together. And part of that, I think, was a knee-jerk reaction to the huge immigration of Vietnamese people that were coming into the country. So, a Vietnamese family would come here, and then they would invite their neighbors and friends and everyone else that was trying to get out of Vietnam and, come to live together. So Fairfax County, we were looking at Fairfax County, and Fairfax County would not allow, unrelated adults, unrelated families to live together. But Falls Church, the city of Falls Church, did allow it. So we were actually looking at Falls Church for that. Well, like I said, we never quite found a place where we could do that. So we ended up not doing that. We still remained close with that other couple, and still to this day remain close to that other couple. You'd know them if I said their name, but eventually I came to consider that personal property is important. Mm-hmm. It provides a boundary, because I can't raise your kids, and I shouldn't raise your kids.
Right.
You should raise your kids. Now, to the degree that we can help each other do that, I think that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But I also think that the boundaries of personal property and are important to establish a domain, establish the boundaries.
Sure.
So yeah, communism purports to have all things in common, but it, of course it doesn't. We know that, but it purports to have that, and the socialist—that's
the idea.
The socialist idea really
that we all own each other's everything, which really means we all own nothing.
Yeah,
and the government owns it all.
Yeah, or those in positions of leadership own it all. Yeah. So.
Yeah, with that.
What's your thoughts on that? I mean, I own my own home. You own your own home. Mm-hmm. Should we, as they did in Acts, throw everything into the pool and live? Everyone lives everyone has pooled everything and sharing it all, we see that in Acts. So how does that, I know I'm throwing out a tough question here, but what are your thoughts on that?
Great question. Yeah. And one that a lot of people ask because it sounds biblical. That's one of the things with like communist, communism seems to me to only be able to flourish in a post-Christian society.
Right.
Who was the one that really showed me this? Francis Schaeffer.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend Francis Schaeffer, the How Then Shall We Live?
My man.
He's great. Another guy before his time. Most people are. Most like really people that really understand the current time are also people that are before their time
but they know it by looking back.
Because they look back, they see where we've been, they see, if that's the case, there's the progression, and therefore this is where it's going. So you read guys like G.K. Chesterton, he has other things, not just stories. He's got, Heresy and Orthodoxy, fantastic books, I highly recommend those two, which in a similar way, like a Francis Schaeffer, really, and Hideous Strength, Lewis is doing the same thing. Abolition of Man, doing the same thing there too. So really read these guys, and then you'll understand what they're doing with their fiction, is not very fiction at all.
Right. It's mythos.
It's
mythos to get to logos.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And there's truth from beginning to end. So with that question, basically, Francis Schaeffer says that communism and communistic society preys on this Christian society because it can use words like compassion, can use words like brotherly love, it can use words, and we all have that language. And so we, with those ideas of shouldn't we love our neighbor as ourselves, that was one that was used, weaponized against us in 2020, with COVID and everything else, that really, you don't even own your own personal, your body,
right? Exactly.
You need to think about your own germs, and how that affects your neighbor, and you need to love your neighbor, to such a degree that, that is binding on you, and all of your property, it's binding on you. This needing to love your neighbor as yourself, you're bound to have to love your neighbor as yourself. Therefore, everything you own needs to be, at your neighbor's disposal, as much as it is yours. And so there's nothing that you have that your neighbor is not entitled to as well. And so, and those are some key words there, this entitlement, you have to get a vaccine for your neighbor. You have to wear a mask for your neighbor. You have to, pay, this money for your neighbor, or for anybody else. So is that what's going on in Acts? I say no. I think if we don't actually have personal property, we cannot be hospitable. We cannot show brotherly affection and philanthropy, as it was coming, that idea of brotherly love. You actually can't be generous. You can't have true charity if it's all entitled. If you're entitled to everything I have, then that is just justice that you get what I have. If you need something I have and I give it to you, it's not a gift.
Right.
You're entitled to it. It's yours. It's actually, if I withhold it from you, I'm doing you wrong.
Right.
So it's more of a justice issue, not love, right? I'm not freely giving it to you and helping you out. So I think what they were doing was loving one another, treating each other as family, but it never meant that all of their personal property actually belonged to everyone else. It didn't mean everyone was entitled to everything that any individual had. And we see that with Ananias and Sapphira.
Right.
If we just keep reading, the very first example that we're given is everyone was selling all their properties, right? Barnabas and others, they're selling their properties. They're laying down all the money at the feet of the apostles for the daily distribution, as they're going through famine and difficulties, within Jerusalem. And they're helping all the brothers. As any had need, they were all coming together to help meet those needs, right? But then Ananias and Sapphira sell, and there's a kind of a thing wrapped up in that. If you give everything you have, now you're in need.
Right.
You know, so
right.
that doesn't actually solve the problem.
Right.
It just created another one.
Right.
I gave you everything. Wait, now I need some of that back, or I need, you know, and so you're creating a need by not having anything. But Ananias and Sapphira, what are they told?
So their problem was that they said that we gave it all.
Yeah. And what did Peter say? You didn't have to give it all. It was yours. It was yours to do whatever you wanted with it. You didn't have to lie like everybody. Everyone else was putting the full proceeds down. Hey, take it all, use it for the daily distribution. Maybe they're selling extra property, or, you know, they're selling, you know, the house that we have, you know, we don't really need that, or they're selling things and putting all the proceeds down. They want to look righteous. They want to look virtue. They're the first virtue signalers, you know. And they're trying to look virtuous. They're trying to look like everybody else and look like they're doing the same thing, and they're withholding some of it. And in so doing, that is a lie against not just, you know, to everyone else, but to the Holy Spirit, is a sin against God.
Right.
So, but they're told. My whole point there is just to grab that one phrase Peter said. It was yours. When you sold all that, and it was yours to do whatever you wanted. You didn't have to lay it all down. You could have kept. It was fine that you kept some back.
Yeah, if you come in and said, "Hey, listen, I'm giving you half of what I've got."
Yeah, sure, great, thank you.
Yeah,
you know, praise be to God. Yeah, so I don't believe that this Acts, you know, passage is supporting a communistic idea of our belongings. I think if you have that communistic idea, then I can't be hospitable. I can't invite you over my house and be hospitable to you and, you know, pour you nice whiskey, or, you know, same thing for, if I deserve all of this, you know, that this chair is just as much mine as what it is yours, that, you know, the whiskey, the pipe, everything else, if I'm entitled to it, then you're giving me what I deserve. And if you withheld it from me, you'd be in some sort of legal trouble, right? That's not this. So if it's just only justice, if you're taking away any ability to be generous, loving, compassionate, truly. The other one, that guy that talks about this is a French writer. Oh my gosh, what's his name? He writes The Law. You know what I'm talking about?
Doesn't come to mind.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I would highly recommend it. You can actually find it on YouTube, and I'll read it to you. The Law by Frederick Bastiat.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Bastiat. Right. Frederick, yeah, The Law by Frederick. And it looks like Bastiat, but it's probably Bastiat or some
French name. Yeah.
Some French sounding name. Yeah, that's fantastic. He makes that very same argument, that if the government forces you to have to take care of others, then now you've made it. You've turned that in. You've turned all brotherly love.
Yeah, you've taken away opportunity for charity.
Yeah, you're forcing me to have to do it.
Yeah.
And you're telling me it's a certain percentage that you're going to take from me and give to somebody else. If he makes the argument, now if we did that, if I stole something from somebody and gave it to somebody else, I would be in trouble.
Right.
But if the government does it, you're telling me that that's okay. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, great book. That would be maybe a whole nother podcast worth of discussion.
Podcast, yeah.
That'd be a great book study, though. That'd be something that maybe we could do. A group of guys would be fun.
I'd love to do Francis Schaeffer with everyone.
So good.
Yeah. He's had a video series out that was done, if it wasn't the late 60s, it was the early 70s. And you mentioned it. It was How Then Should We Live? And he did a book initially.
That's what I read.
But then he did a video series, which, you know, this is in the dawning of video production.
Are they on VHS?
Yeah, I mean, no one was doing it. I mean, he was like one of the first guys to actually do a video production.
In the 80s, maybe?
No, it was earlier than that.
Even earlier.
Yeah, it was earlier than that. It was probably the late 70s.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I've got the video series here somewhere. But so the production value is, compared to today, is horrible.
Right.
But it's so interesting to watch him, and you know, he's from Switzerland. I don't know where he originally is from, but he lived in Switzerland and founded L'Abri, which was an educational center, basically. You know, people would go there and sit under the teaching, and, you know, a lot of students and people would go to L'Abri. R.C. Sproul sort of modeled Ligonier Ministries that was in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, after that same idea.
Oh, wow.
So that was here in the States, but it was after that same kind of model where, you know, you'd go and spend a weekend or a week or whatever and
That's great.
sit under the teaching. I mean, just really.
Leithart has that too. It's called Theopolis Institutes. Yeah, but same thing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You go and learn as a fellow. Who else did? Dietrich Bonhoeffer had something like that too. Maybe a little bit more informal.
Yeah. You know, MacArthur does some of that as well with his Shepherd's Conference and stuff, which is really aimed at pastors. But, you know, again, it's just getting teachers together and, you know, here's where we are, you know.
Right, yeah.
It's really good stuff.
Great.
So talk to me. I'm gonna divert here a little bit. Talk to me about Galatians 6:16. We were talking about the temple, and that leads into this whole notion of Israel. You know, because there's a lot. We did this in the Daniel 7 Changes Everything podcast, which was the last podcast we did. One of the things that we didn't really talk about, but was part and parcel of that whole train of thought, was that the church is now true Israel. So Galatians 6:16 is where Paul is ending the book of Galatians. He's writing to them, and it's the very last 3 or 4 verses of Galatians. He's giving a benediction, basically, to the people of Galatia, and he says, "Yeah,
should we sign off here and give them one other?
Yeah,
because
this is a big one.
This is a big one.
All right, folks, you're gonna have to watch number 8 to pick up from here. So I hope you've enjoyed our podcast here this morning or this afternoon. Again, happy birthday, Pastor Zach.
And happy birthday to you.
And this is Peter Ristow.
And Zach Ritz.
Signing off.